There are two balls of yarn protecting my microphone from the fan right now because it's so hot. Hey everybody, welcome back to Lost My Ducks. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about red flags, and I'm going to talk about why I left radio, because that is a giant red flag in and amongst itself. So let's get right into this. Like, subscribe, turn your notifications on. This is going to be a bit of a vague story about why I left radio and things I could have done different, and hopefully it is able to help you figure out when it's time to leave a job and when it's time to kind of move on or move forward in life, and just little things to watch for. So, the story goes. My light just died, so if it looks a little different, that's why. So I had a couple radio jobs before I landed my last one, which was the trigger for me to leave the industry completely. So I got hired on at this position, and I was hired on to do just like overnight on the weekends. So the lowest of the totem pole. And that's fine. Okay, I was not expecting to start out in radio at like the top, especially at like, I guess, a major market station. So I was doing the overnights, and then I was asked if I wanted to do some chase producing, so I jumped on it. I'm a bit ambitious, that's just how I am. So I jumped on the opportunity to do some chase producing. That went well for a couple of months, and then I stopped doing that, and a position had opened up. I didn't get it, they hired somebody else, that's fine. I was doing more on-air stuff, so on and so forth. So, the first year was great. The second year, we had an incident at my work that caused the station to go off the air, all three stations. And anyways, one of my coworkers went on mat leave, and she was working at the FM station, and they needed someone to fill in, and I was like, I'll fill in, being ambitious. So I'm filling in at the FM station, and I was originally doing the overnights at the AM station, and I was still doing the overnights at the AM station while I was filling in midday at the FM station, which I was like, okay, cool, like, let's do this. I will cover. And then it was brought forward that we would all be kind of moving to another city for a couple months while they built us a new radio station, because the one we were in, they were completely gutting the building, and there was also the IBM servers were in there too. Us and them were the only people left in this building after this incident, and we had to leave. So that's fine. That's fine. We got our new station. Anyways, it was in a mall. It's just crazy. There's so many crazy things that happened. But anyways, I was moved to weekday overnights. So I went from Sunday night to Friday morning. So I worked the 5 days of the week, Sunday night to Friday morning, and that was fine. And then I would come back home Friday morning, like it was a 2.5 hour bus trip each way. And just kind of spend the weekend in the city, in my home city. There was a couple times where another person had called in sick, and I was right back in the other city, like 6-hour turnaround, and I was exhausted. Anyways, all that stuff happened. Because of that, I was able, with the per diem money, to put the down payment on our condo and blah, blah, blah. That's another podcast. So, we're back in our home city now. All of that is straightened out. I am wanting more hours, so I start doing evenings as well as the weekend overnights. So I'm doing, like, I think it was Wednesday, Thursday, 6 to midnight, and then Friday overnight, Saturday overnight. Those were what I was doing. Sometimes, because it's radio, it was like you would work Saturday from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. and then you'd have to be back at 6 p.m. And it was so crazy. And there was sometimes like you'd work on the Sunday, you'd do the 12 to, or the 6 to midnight, and then be back Monday morning for 5 a.m. That was brutal. And that's against the labor laws. But we're not going to get into that today. I worked all the time by the end of this job. Like, I had 2 or 3 days off a month, and it was getting too crazy. But that's not, well, that's part of why I left. That's not the main reason, though. So as we progressed, I got really good at my job, and I was training people, and I was helping out with different things, and another colleague of mine retired, so I was trained to do the football games, so I was the person who did the football games. And I was like, okay, let's please have somebody who could be a backup for football, because what if I'm sick? What if I'm away? What if something happens? This is crazy. I can't be the only person who knows how to do this. We did eventually get a backup, and I'm grateful for that, but it was still nuts. So I started to notice, like, once we got back from the other city, that I was being overlooked for things a lot, okay? There was, the first incident of it was a traffic position came up to do morning traffic. I applied. They said no. That's fine. Okay, whatever, maybe I'm not qualified. I'd only been working there for a couple of years. We hired another guy who was actually doing some engineering stuff, and we started having him do technical producing. I trained him. Nice guy. It just is what it is. He was younger than me and less experience. And a position came up because somebody retired. Of course I applied for it. So did this guy. This guy got it. And I was like, what? And I asked my boss, and he was like, well, this guy is a better fit for the role than you. I'm like, oh, okay. Why? Oh, well, they just have more experience. I'm like, well, no, they don't. I do. But okay, I was really angry about that. But the person that retired also hosted an evening show, and he insisted that I got that show. He just kind of handed it off to me. And this person that retired had been there for about 50 years, so there was no kind of arguing with him. And I got that evening show. And I enjoyed that. I was happy about that. I was really glad I got that evening show. Yay. So, the evening show was pre-tape, so I could have done any shift and still done the evening show, because it was a pre-tape. Anyways, let's move forward to more red flags as to when I should have quit. So, but I didn't, because it's like you're hanging on to your radio career or whatever career you have, and you're like, oh, I want to make a real go of this. But then it just starts to become abundantly apparent that there's people that are kind of stopping you from having this career that you want. So, another guy gets hired, nice guy. I think he was like a year older than me, possibly a little bit more experience, or we were like right on the same level of experience, because he had worked at a station previous and had done some work in another province. So, cool. Nice guy. I'm training him. Okay, and he had all of his paperwork, and I'm not one of those people that like goes through people's things. It was just right there. And we were talking about, he's like, I need help filling out the tax form. And he's like pointing at stuff on the form, and it says how much he makes, which was about $5 an hour more than what I was making. He was a new hire. And I'm like, wow, that's a kick in the face. What do you do about that, right? So he was a new hire, and he was making about $5 an hour more than I was. At this point in time, I'd been at the company for 3 years. So I was like, oh, okay, and I didn't say anything. I just helped him fill out his tax forms, like, and it was fine. It was fine. I filled out his tax forms for him. I'm good at that stuff. So, fill out the tax form, we'll help him fill out the tax form. And then I go to our assistant program director. And I was like, hey, and she's a she. It's like, this happened. I'm like, it's kind of weird to be emailing about this because it's like, there's so much in the workplace about don't share how much you make. And I think that's wrong. I think everybody should know how much everybody else makes. And that's a big red flag for me when it's like kept so secret. Don't share your wage. Don't share your wage. Because you know somebody else is getting screwed. That's what that means to me. So I went to her and she was like, that's not cool. She ended up getting me a raise. It was only about $1.50, but I got something. So we're at like red flag number 4 or something. So that was kind of annoying. So the afternoon traffic position comes up. And the person that's doing it at that point in time, or was doing it, was a friend of mine. She was great. She actually had like a trauma, a heart condition, and she died in the newsroom and then was brought back to life. Weird day. Anyways, that was a weird day. So that happened, and so that position obviously becomes available, and I was like, oh, like, I'll apply for it. Why not, right? This friend of mine, she was doing it, and the new guy that I had just trained also applied for this position. Guess who got it? The new guy. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine, that's fair, whatever. No, it's not. Anyways, I was like, okay, what's the issue this time? What's the issue this time? Well, the afternoon drive was a woman, and nobody wants to hear 2 women because it just sounds like bitching. That was the reason this time. And I was like, huh. Wow. But there's always been a woman in afternoon traffic, or it was like the guy in the helicopter and then ground traffic. Like, it didn't make sense. And I was like, wow, okay, there's another red flag. At this point in time, I had started looking for other positions in other companies. Not a lot was coming up, and that's fine. So I had interviewed for like one call, and I had interviewed for the Traffic Network actually, and just a couple of other interviews, and nothing kind of panned out. And I was like, okay, because at the time there was a lot of people looking for jobs. And it was like me or somebody who doesn't already have a job, because I was just looking at switching careers. So nothing really panned out. And a couple years go by, and it almost seemed like there was more responsibility given to me. Like, I would do scheduling, and when shit would hit the fan, people would call me, and that was kind of aggravating because I want a day off. I wasn't paid to be called. I wasn't paid to be on call. I remember once over Christmas, so my sister worked up north, and she was at work for Christmas. And so we were having our Christmas, the 27th, 28th, 29th. I booked those days off. I always worked Christmas Day. And I booked those days off, and everybody knew, like, I would work Christmas Day because my sister wasn't there, and I would see my mom during the day and whatever, right? So I booked the 27th, 28th, 29th off. And I'm like, do not bug me. I always work Christmas. I always work New Year's Eve. I never go out. I never do the thing. People are calling me the 27th and the 28th because they couldn't follow the entire schedule that I had written out minute by minute. This is what's supposed to happen. Don't fuck it up. This is what's supposed to happen. So I finally, on the 28th, I call my boss. And I'm like, look, I'm not against helping people, but could you please tell everybody to stop calling me because this is my Christmas and I want to be left alone. What? How many people have called you? At least 6. And at one point in time, I was on the phone for an hour and a half because the engineers wouldn't answer the phone, and I was trying to troubleshoot an issue because the sound was crackly or something. I don't even know. I don't even remember. I was so angry. So my boss was like, putting the word out. No, he's like, I'm sending a mass email, text message to everybody. Do not call you. And he's also told me to pay myself. He's like, put some extra hours on your sheet and pay yourself for being on call. And I'm like, okay, thank you. So I didn't have any phone calls the 29th, which was nice. But I always worked holidays. I always did that because like my holidays were very convoluted. I think there was one year that my sister was here for Christmas and not up north. And people still called me. And I was like, wow, I haven't had a Christmas in like 5 years and you guys are doing this, hey? Other points in time when people would call me, I was on vacation. Twice it happened. I was on vacation. Once I was kind of drunk in Las Vegas and I had the news director call me because everybody else wasn't answering the phone. And he's like, please help me. I don't know what to do. And I was like, okay. And I helped. And then the other time I get a call, it's 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm in another province. And they're like, you have to be here in like 20 minutes. I'm like, no, I don't, because I'm on vacation and I booked this time off. Lose my number for the next 10 days. Like, I'm not coming in. I'm done. Like, leave me alone. So I got in a bit of trouble for that one because, oh, well, why aren't you available? Because I'm on vacation and I'm not in the province and it's going to take me 16 hours to get back there and I'm not coming in. So just leave me alone. So that was some of the stuff that was happening. Big, huge red flags. There was some problems that were not in my pay grade that I was solving and I didn't want to solve anymore. I started looking again. This is near the end of my radio career at this particular station. Well, at any station, because this was the last one I worked at. So I was there for 8 years in total. About a year before I left, there was a lot of changes happening, and I was working usually from noon to 5. And I was fine with that. I loved it. I could still put my show on the air. I could do all kinds of things. It was great. It was relaxing. Nice shift, flew by. I know, 5-hour shift. It's so they don't have to give you breaks. That's why. That's what happens in radio. If you don't get a break if you're in AM because everything's down to the second. So I was working from noon to 5 and I was doing my show, and at this point in time, I was kind of checking out. And then I had my performance review. I was also anchoring the news a lot, like in the evenings. Like if I was working from 5 to midnight, I would do the 11 and 12 o'clock newscasts. And then I would anchor the news on the weekends or during the football game or whenever. So anyway, lots of stuff. So all of that kind of started happening. And then I had a podcast with my show, and it was doing really, really well, actually. It was doing really well. It was our #1 podcast, and it was getting about 1,000 hits a week. And then they said no because they wanted the other political commentator podcast to be our #1 podcast, so they got rid of mine. So that kind of pissed me off. This was when we bought another news station. Anyways, so that happened. About a year before I left, not even, maybe like 9 months, 8 months, I had my performance review. It's different from a critique. A critique is every couple months. They pull your worst 3 newscasts of the last like 6 months somehow. And they're like, you didn't say your last name right. You didn't do this. It's not Pakistan, it's Pakistan. And you're like, wow, okay, thank you. I love being pulled apart. It's great. So critiques are different than your performance evaluation. Your performance evaluation or review is like an hour-long meeting with your boss, and it's just, essentially how much you suck at life. So it's not that bad. It is that bad, especially in radio, because it's like, oh, well, your ratings could be better. Or, oh, you could do this better. Oh, you could do that better. And you're like, okay, thank you. No guidance, just telling me to do it better. And it's like, great. Anyways, at this point in time, my show was number 1 in its time slot and number 2 overall. Yay! Right? So I was doing pretty good. I was pretty happy. I'd gotten the show a sponsor, had done a bunch of stuff, and it was great. So we're sitting in my performance review, and I had just gotten divorced. So my boss is like, oh, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, well, I'm divorced. And he was like, what? He's like, do you need some time off? I'm like, no, I'm okay. Like, this is normal. So it's kind of like a normal thing to go to every day. And he was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, how long were you guys together? Oh, 14 years. And that kind of stuff, like kind of shooting the shit, seeing where I'm sitting at. And then we were just talking about my show and how it's doing well and yada, yada, yada. And then he's like, okay, well, what are your goals? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I was like, I hope that I have a more involved show. I would like to do some talk to the experts. I would like to do some other things. And he was like, oh, okay, good for you, I'm like, well, where do you see me in 5 years? And he was like, well, actually, I see you as my boss. And I was like, red flag right there. I was like, I got to get the hell out of here. Not even a couple weeks later, a position comes up for the morning show. Okay. And I was like, yeah, morning show. And I was offered that job. And I was like, okay, cool. What's the salary? At the time, it was $32,000 a year, and I would not make extra for appearances. That's a big thing, okay? So when you go on like a live on location, you make about $250 to $500, depending on who you are. That's $16 an hour. $32,000 a year is $16 an hour for like Monday to Friday, and I have to be at work at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't leave till noon, plus I have to do appearances on the weekend, and I don't get paid for those. And I was like, no, I'm good. Thank you. I was looking again for another job. So yet again, a male colleague of mine, really nice guy, great guy, I trained him. So he was wonderful, and he actually got the job. His girlfriend worked there. They're married now. Wonderful people. Nothing mean to say about any of them ever. Like, they're just really nice people. So this colleague comes in and he's like, hey, they offered me the morning show job. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm like, I couldn't take it. And, he's like, how much did they offer you? I was like, oh, 32. And he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, they offered me 38 plus I get paid appearances. And I was like, wow. Wow. I was like, yeah, I'm done. Like, in my head, I was just like, I'm done. You're offering somebody with less experience, who I trained, $6,000 more a year, plus paid appearances, and you offered me minimum wage. I was like, wow, that's a kick in the face. Okay. So I had made up my mind. I was done. A couple weeks go by, and I have an interview with the railroad. And that's a whole other podcast. So I have an interview with the railroad, and we're talking about salary and stuff like that. And their starting wage was $28 an hour, I believe, or $27.50. Something crazy, something good, something that I think I deserved. I'd worked at the railroad before, so this was like going back to the old railroad. Anyway, like I said, whole other podcast. So I'm debating this. I'm like, well, if they give me an offer, what do I do? Blah, 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 blah. My boss comes in. He's heard rumors that I'm looking for a new job and I'm interviewing and there's some interest in me. And he's like, well, what do we have to do for you to stay? And I was like, okay. I'm like, here's what I want. And it wasn't a lot. Like, I want a raise. Everybody makes more than I do, including all of our new hires. I was making like $16.75 and they were hiring new people at $18 an hour. And when I would fill in over on the FMs, I was making $18 an hour, but on my main gig, I was only making $16.75, and I was like, okay. I'm like, I want a raise because our new hires are making more than I am, which really sucked. Like, it just... Anyway. And I said, I want more stable hours. I want this shift. Make this my shift. And he just sits there and looks at me and he's like, well, we'll see what we can do after the summer. Summer, there isn't you're not in ratings in the summer, so we'll see what we can do after the summer. This was in June. The railroad gets back to me a couple days later and they make me an offer. And the 28 an hour. And I took it. And they're like, okay, well, you have to start like July 4th. So I gave 8 days notice at the radio station. And I was like, I felt really shitty about that. Not because of loyalty or anything like that, but because of helping out my coworkers. It had nothing to do with the company or my boss. It was my coworkers. So I felt kind of shitty about that. But I had made my decision. I'm like, I'm undervalued here. I don't think I'm going anywhere. Nobody is going to give me any opportunity to go anywhere in this business. It's just not going to happen. So I left. I left with my 8 days notice. And before I left, another colleague of mine who also got a job that I applied for, but he had a bunch of experience from other stations and stuff. He comes into the control room and he's like, so what do you do here? And I gave him a list and he's like, oh, yeah, good luck. I don't think they ever filled my position, and that's okay. That's okay. I think it's their problem. You know, I don't even want to think about it. There's a lot of weird things happening with radio right now, but that is essentially why I left radio, and that was all the red flags, and that was me not wanting to be undervalued anymore, and me not wanting to sit in a position where I have people who are brand new, fresh out of school, making $2 or $3 an hour more than I am, and just sitting there being undervalued and treated like shit for my entire career. Lesson is, if there's a bunch of red flags, don't ignore them. Pay attention to them. Don't get screwed around. And anybody who says there isn't a pay discrepancy between men and women is wrong. Because in some industries, that discrepancy is huge. Like in radio, and it still is. It's not fair. In media, in Canada, and probably the US too, women are paid a lot less. We just are. So there's that. If you feel you're being undervalued at your job, say something. Say something. I wish I would have spoken up more. Hindsight being what it is, that is my regret there, but I still don't think anything would have changed the outcome of what happened. So that's that. I hope you guys enjoyed. It's a shorter one today, and I hope you guys like, subscribe, turn your notifications on, leave some comments, ask some questions, do all that other fun stuff. Lost My Ducks, Season 3, Episode 2 in the books, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye!